Formula One is full of spies. Now, I'm not talking about the Aston Martin team and 007. I'm talking about spy photographers. People going around other teams' cars, taking photos and finding out exactly how they make their cars as fast as they do. They're trying to use that information for making their cars faster. Because after all, in Formula One, winning is everything. And in this video, I'm going to explain exactly what they get up to. How? Because I've been approached by an insider from Formula One who's willing to spill the beans exactly what goes on within the industry. It'll blow your mind. Buy, sell,
car, wow.
In this video, rather than me tell you exactly what goes on in Formula One, I'm going to let our insider explain it to you. Obviously, I need to protect their identity because they're still actually working in Formula One. Anyway, I'm going to hand over to them now so they can explain exactly what goes on.
So the first thing to say is, in the industry, we don't call it spy photography. In shorthand, photographers might refer to it as spy photography, but the teams will refer to it as technical photography, and that's what would go down on somebody's brief. It's known as technical photography because you're looking at the technical elements of the car. So rather than being creative, you're looking at it almost from a scientific point of view, how the car works, how it's constructed. It's almost like you're doing a technical drawing and you're looking to create that with a camera. Teams are looking to get any advantage they can, and one of the ways they can do that is by looking at what their competitors are doing. Most likely, all teams have a technical photographer, either employed directly or through an agency, and their main job will be to work with their teams and photograph the parts of the car that their team's interested in knowing more about.
So that's the background, but how exactly do they go about finding out what their rival team's cars actually look like?
So if one team thinks another team has an advantage, for example, they might think that the front wing on the other car is working better than theirs is, they want to know how it's constructed, what shape it is, what the dimensions are. They can't just walk into the garage and start measuring it, but they can get someone to photograph it. And then using software and analysis and comparing it to other things in the frame of the photo, and by shooting it in exactly the same way they shoot their own car, you can compare things and get a pretty good idea of what's going on. During testing, teams can have garage doors closed, or they can use screens to hide the car, or they can have people standing in front of the car. So a lot of technical photography will take place out on track during testing, or at the end of the pit lane, or when they're pitting. And with testing, you're more likely to get a car break down as teams get used to their new cars and their new parts. So if a car stops on track, or especially if it's being lifted onto a lorry to be recovered, that might be a time they can use to their advantage to get a shot. It's against regulations to close the garage doors or shield the car with screens during the race though, but it's still difficult to photograph some of the parts of the car. Teams will be very careful about when the bodywork comes off, for example. To the photographers, it's a challenge. It's not an easy brief by any means, but the guys who do this are very skillful at knowing when they can shoot certain parts of the cars. Each team will have a time slot when they're due in scrutineering, for example, so they'll know when each team is due in and they'll wait outside to get pictures then, or when it's going to the grid, or when it's on the pit lane, or when it's on track.
Now, in order to make all this possible, you need good people, but they also need the right kit. And actually, the equipment they use is very similar to what a normal magazine or newspaper photographer would use. However, they use it in quite a different way.
If you're taking a picture for a magazine, you might want to have some movement in the background, or it might be nicely blurred using a slow shutter speed. A wing might be out of focus and the driver's head would be sharp. There'll be loads of depth to the photo. Technical photographers, they will be shooting completely different types of pictures. Quite often the picture will be overexposed, so it's a little bit brighter. Colours will look a little bit wrong. But this lets the team see in the shadows, where like the suspension is, for example. Different parts of the car will be sharp all through the image. Not as much will be out of focus, there'll be a lot of depth to it. So if you want to look at the back wing and you want that to be sharp, you might also want the suspension sharp, and everything will be nicely in focus because that's a lot more useful for the teams when they're analysing things.
Now, getting images of cars in the pit garage isn't the only thing that they need to do. They also need to get them in motion.
You can tell a lot about a car from when it's stationary, the shape of the wing, how it's constructed, which way the vanes run. But a lot of what they'll be trying to find out involves the car when it's on track, like the force from the tyres, the angle of the suspension, how much roll there is in the car. To the naked eye they all look the same, but to a camera and an expert who has the pictures shot in a certain way, they'll be able to work out certain elements. If you're looking at how a wing behaves in a high-speed corner, then you'll go and stand in a high-speed corner. Teams will often brief technical photographers quite closely on what pictures they want. So They might want to know how the rear wing or the front wing or the suspension are working under high load or downforce, or it might be the opposite. They might want to know what the car's doing with its ride height or roll in a slow speed corner. So what they want to discover will determine where the photographers will stand. They won't be bothered about the background or the scenery. They're only looking at it from a technical point of view, and they'll often stand in completely different spaces from the editorial guys. Consistency can be really important sometimes. There's no point trying to measure something on everyone's car if the camera's in a different position. So quite often the camera will be fixed and they'll take exactly the same picture of different cars, and then they can tell between each car's different ride height or different angles of certain parts of the car.
Obviously, getting photos of a car as it goes around the corner to see how it behaves under cornering forces is important, but also what could be disastrous for one team could be advantageous to another if they manage to get photos of it.
Now, nobody wants to be an ambulance chaser, but if a car breaks down and gets lifted onto a lorry, parts of the car like the underfloor that are hard to photograph, you can see those. And during testing, sometimes you'll get marshals who maybe aren't as well trained as the race marshals, or the wind catches a car and it will angle itself as the car's going onto the lorry, and that can be a chance to get a photo of the underfloor or underneath the diffuser or other parts that wouldn't normally be exposed. It's the same with a crash shot. The chances are slim a technical photographer will be stood in the right place at the right time when a car crashes, but if it does crash and a side pod has been damaged or a body panel comes off, that can reveal things the team's really interested in.
As well as being in the right place at the right time to make sure they can get those vital photographs, the spy photographers also need to be experts in all things Formula One.
The guys who are good at this will be very experienced, very knowledgeable, they'll have worked with the teams and its designers, they'll know enormous amounts about the cars. And they won't just know what parts to photograph, they'll know the angles to get and how best to shoot them, so the person who's analysing the photos has the best chance of getting what they need.
Now, all this may seem rather underhand, but actually it's within the rules. In fact, it's been going on for ages. Even Mercedes team boss Toto Wolff said, "Spy photography has existed in Formula One since God knows when. Everybody has spy photographers." And he's even said he's spotted rival teams using 3D cameras to photograph cars.
There'll be certain points when the cars are all together, like in Parc Fermé or when they're about to go into scrutineering, and you'll get the technical photographers all standing next to each other. They'll all have a good idea of who's working for who. The teams, they're also quite aware of who these spy photographers are and who's working for who. Technical photographers work in a completely different way to everyone else. For instance, like the podiums have no use to them whatsoever, so they won't bother shooting it. Editorial photographers, they might get there an hour or two before the first session. The technical guys, they'll be there to see the cars being wheeled down to the weighbridge or when scrutineering is happening. The teams, they see that. These guys, they'll often end up in the same restaurant or the same hotel. There's not a huge number of photographers in F1, so the teams always see a photographer at scrutineering, and if they're not employing them themselves, you'll have a pretty good idea of what's going on. It's quite a secretive underworld, but there's also quite a bit of fair gamesmanship. It's like everything in motorsport though. The more money you put towards it, the more advantages there are to be gained. If you haven't got a lot of budget, you might have just one spy photographer, but some teams employ more than that, so they've got more data and more opportunities to take advantage of.
The Formula One spy photographers aren't only interested in just general car design and aerodynamics, they're also going to be looking out for recent innovations, things that might be giving other teams an advantage. They'll be trying to get photos of whatever they can.
If you go back to Braun in 2009, there were new regulations about how much downforce cars could develop. Braun came up with this double-decker rear diffuser. It gave them a huge advantage, and it was within the rules. A couple of other teams had something similar, but the other teams, they could react a little bit, but because it wasn't inherently designed as part of their cars, they never really caught up. Sometimes you just have to hold your hands up and say, our cars simply can't be as fast, and you've got to wait till next year when you can completely redesign it. Another good example, a few years ago, McLaren, they came up with a hole in the cockpit the driver could put his hand over. It was linked to how the air flowed through the car. That caused a lot of excitement. Everyone wanted to see how the back wing worked, how it was put together. Every now and then you get a huge innovation like the DAS system on the Mercedes, the hole in the McLaren. There'll be something that the other teams will be keen to know more about.
The work that the spy photographers do doesn't just help inform the development of the car, it can actually influence a team's race strategy.
Some things that give an advantage, like if you run a really high rate car, that can be an aerodynamic advantage, but maybe it makes your car harder on its tyres. So if you're a team that hasn't got that and you see it, maybe you can have a think about a different strategy. And even though your rival's faster, you can have tyres that last longer, for example. Even if one team was given the exact same plans for another team's rear wing, and the other wing is working better, putting it on their car doesn't make the car go faster, because it's all about the package, how everything on the car works together.
There has been the biggest change in the rules for Formula One for ages. In fact, the 2022 season rulebook is about twice the size as that for the previous season. As a result, the teams are having to get used to the changes and they're going to be innovating their cars in different ways. And so now, more than ever, the role of the spy photographer is critical.
When there's a big rule change, everyone sees this as an opportunity to move up the grid. They'll all be looking to see if there's something that seems watertight, but there's a loophole that gives them an advantage. There's all these brand new cars on track. Nobody's seen each other's cars, and teams are going to be very excited to see how their rivals have interpreted the rules. And they'll be keen to get those technical pictures back at the end of each morning. They'll be sat in their trucks late at night, poring over these pictures, trying to work out what the other teams have done, why they've done what they've done, and if it's been any better, how they've interpreted the rules. Should they be taking some inspiration, if you like, from their rivals and head off in that direction? The FIA can do all the due diligence they want, but it's almost impossible to write watertight rules. If you find something in the rules, there's actually a procedure where you can pitch it to the FIA before you spend millions developing something they'd end up banning. Then at the end of a regulation cycle, like we've just seen, when there's a big rule change, a car with an updated wing everybody's sure is making it go faster and giving it an advantage. The teams will be looking to see if they can do something similar later in the year. Eventually, all the teams head towards a similar route of aerodynamics and parts.
Anyway, what do you think about spy photography in Formula One? Do you think it's fair? Do you think they should stop it? Do you reckon it should be banned? And while you're at it, who do you think is going to win this season? Let me know in the comments below. Done a pinned comment where you can vote. Anyhow, I hope you all enjoyed the video. If you did, give it a like. Let me know some other videos you'd like to see. And click on those windows there to watch some more videos. And if you click on that box there, you can go to carwow and we will help you sell your car. Just upload some photos, give a brief description, and our dealers will bid on your car to make sure you get a great price for it. Thanks for watching.